The Baron of Zelthar was not a man, nor anything close to human. He was tall, scaled, and draped in robes of black silk, stitched with the bones of conquered enemies. His name was whispered in fear across 3 star systems, for he ruled with cruelty and treated mercy as weakness. When Captain Elias Ward, a human prisoner of war, was dragged into the Baron's throne chamber, the air grew heavy. The hall was vast, with stone pillars carved into the shapes of screaming faces. Servants knelt low, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Chains rattled on Ilias's wrists as 2 guards pushed him forward. He was tired, bruised, and hungry, but his back was still straight. The Baron leaned back on his throne of obsidian. His slit-pupiled eyes glittered like cold fire. He studied Elias as one might study an insect, with more curiosity than respect. Then his lip curled into a cruel smile, the kind that made soldiers flinch. "Human," the Baron's voice slithered. "Through the chamber, you fought hard in the last battle. Strong, foolish, brave." He spat the last word like poison. "Many begged me for death rather than capture. Yet you live. I wondered, do you regret that?" Elias said nothing. His throat was dry, but more than that, he knew silence sometimes carried more power than words. The Baron disliked that silence. His claws tapped the arm of his throne. Then, with a slow and deliberate wave of his hand, the Baron snapped his fingers. A side door opened, and footsteps echoed across the chamber. All eyes turned. From the shadows emerged a girl. She was young, perhaps 12, perhaps 14. Elias could not tell with alien years. She was smaller than the guards, fragile in comparison to her father. Her skin shimmered faintly, almost like pearl under light. Her eyes glowed softly, as though holding trapped stars inside them, but her mouth did not move. Her gaze never rose above the floor. She walked carefully, silently, until she stood before the throne. "My daughter," the Baron declared, his voice dripping with contempt. "Born weak, born flawed, she has no voice. Useless to me, useless to my house, a curse upon my bloodline." The girl flinched, but made no sound. Her hands twisted together nervously, and she lowered her eyes further, as though trying to disappear into herself. The court, filled with nobles and warriors, erupted in laughter. Cruel laughter. Laughter that stabbed at the silence surrounding her. Elias felt something stir inside his chest. He did not know this girl, but he recognized the weight of humiliation, the sting of being unwanted. He clenched his fists against the chains. The Baron stood, towering over both of them. His smile widened into something more terrible. "Take her," he said suddenly, pointing at Elias. "She is yours now, a gift, human. Do what you wish with her. Break her, feed her to the beasts, or simply let her starve. She belongs to you." Gasps rippled through the hall. Some laughed harder, expecting the human to treat her as trash. Others whispered, confused by the strangeness of the gift. Elias's jaw tightened, his heart pounded. He looked at the girl. She was trembling, but her glowing eyes lifted just enough to meet his for the briefest moment. In them, he saw something unexpected. Not emptiness, not weakness, but a storm locked inside silence. He turned back toward the Baron, who leaned forward, watching like a predator. "Why?" Elias rasped finally. His voice was low but steady. "Why give me your blood?" The Baron chuckled darkly. "Because it amuses me. Because she is nothing. And because watching you both suffer will please me." His laughter filled the chamber, echoed by the nobles around him. The guards shoved Elias and the girl together and dragged them toward the dungeon halls. The girl did not resist, though her hands trembled. She made no sound, not even a cry. That night, in the darkness of their cell, Elias sat across from her. The silence pressed between them like an invisible wall. He studied her carefully. Her shoulders were hunched, her lips sealed tight, her eyes staring at the cold stone floor. But there was something more, something alive in her silence, something her father had never cared to see. Elias thought of his own daughter, long gone, and his throat burned. He knew then that this was no gift. It was cruelty, a cruel joke. Yet as he watched the girl wrap her arms around herself and close her glowing eyes, Elias whispered under his breath so softly she might never hear, "You're not nothing." For the first time since his capture, Elias felt a spark inside him, a dangerous, human spark, hope. The dungeon was colder than death. The walls dripped with moisture, and the smell of rust and rot lingered like smoke. A single torch burned weakly outside the bars, its light flickering on the stone floor. Elias sat against the wall, chains still, heavy on his wrists. Across from him, the girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like two lanterns that refused to die. Hours passed in silence, not the comfortable kind, but the sharp, suffocating silence of two strangers locked together with nothing but fear between them. Elias wanted to speak, but he hesitated. What words could bridge the chasm built by cruelty? At last he tried. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Do you understand me?" The girl did not lift her head. Her fingers twitched slightly, as though she wanted to respond, but did not dare. He leaned forward. "Do you know who I am?" Still nothing. Only her eyes flicked up for the briefest second, then darted away. Elias sighed and leaned back. He had faced alien soldiers, monsters, and battlefields drenched in blood. Yet somehow, this quiet girl unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was fragile. And fragility, in a place like this, was more terrifying than any weapon. The Baron had called her useless. Elias doubted that. He could see tension in her posture, strength buried under years of silence. But strength locked away was still strength wasted. That night, his stomach twisted with hunger. The guards had thrown a plate into the bread and a strip of dried meat. One plate. Not two. Elias looked at the food, then at the girl. She stared at it with wide eyes, but she didn't move toward it. Maybe she expected him to snatch it all. Maybe she had learned that in this palace, mercy didn't exist. Slowly, Elias picked up the bread. He broke it into 2 pieces. Without speaking, he pushed half across the floor, toward her. The girl froze. Her glowing eyes blinked, and her breath caught. She didn't touch the bread at first. Her hands shook slightly, as though expecting him to snatch it back or strike her. But Elias only waited. Finally, with hesitant fingers, she picked it up. She held it close, studying him carefully, and only when she was certain did she take a small bite. Elias smiled faintly. "Good," he whispered. It was a small act, a crumb of kindness in a dungeon built for despair. But in that moment, something shifted. The silence around her was no longer only armor. It was listening. The next day, when the guards shoved another plate into the cell, Elias repeated the gesture. He split it evenly and slid half toward her. This time, she didn't hesitate as long. By the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. After they had eaten, she crawled closer to him, her small hands gripping something. She opened her palms and placed it gently in his shackled hands. It was a stone. Not an ordinary stone, but one that glowed faintly, like her eyes. Its light was soft, pulsing with warmth, as though alive. Elias looked at her, surprised. "For me?" he asked softly. She gave no answer with words, but her eyes, those glowing, silent eyes, met his steadily for the first time. She nodded. Just once, so small it was almost invisible. Elias's throat tightened. He closed his hand around the stone, feeling the warmth seep into his skin. It wasn't just a stone. It was trust, a fragile gift from someone who had known only cruelty. That night, as he lay against the wall, Elias studied her in the torchlight. She still made no sound, not even in her sleep, but her breathing was steady, peaceful, and he realized something. Her silence was not emptiness. It was not weakness. It was a shield. A shield she had built against a world that never listened. The Baron had given her to him as a joke, as an insult, but Elias no longer saw her as a curse. He saw her as a spark, small, hidden, but alive, in the darkest dungeon of the cruelest palace. Elias Ward began to understand. This girl's silence could speak louder than any words, and though he could not explain why, he made a silent promise to himself. He would not let her be broken. Days passed in the dungeon. Time felt slow, like a river forced through stone. The guards rarely came, except to throw in scraps of food. The air was damp and heavy, yet inside that cell, something quiet was growing. The girl still had not spoken, but her silence was changing. In the beginning, it had been sharp, almost painful. Now it felt softer, less like a wall, and more like a blanket wrapped tightly around her. Elias began to learn her small gestures. The way her fingers twitched when she was afraid. The faint glow in her skin when she was calm. The tilt of her head when she was curious. He realized that her silence was not absence, it was language. A language no one had cared enough to learn. One morning, the guards tossed in a plate with a heel of bread and a small flask of water. Elias picked it up, ready to split it, as always. But this time, before he could, the girl reached out first. She broke the bread in half herself and pushed a piece toward him. Elias froze, his chest tightened. It was such a small act, but it meant more than words. For the first time, she had shared with him, instead of waiting in fear. "Thank you," he said softly. His voice cracked with sincerity. She didn't reply, but her glowing eyes lingered on him for longer than usual, and that was enough. That night, something else happened. The girl sat quietly near the corner, her fingers curled around something hidden. After a while, she crawled toward Elias and opened her small hands. Inside was another stone, glowing faintly. This one was smoother, brighter, like it had been polished with care. She placed it gently into his palm and closed his fingers around it. Elias looked at her. Another gift. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching. She gave the smallest nod. He swallowed hard. He had been given medals, weapons, even titles in his life as a soldier. None of them meant as much as this small, glowing stone, because this was not a token of power. It was trust. Elias held the stone close to his chest. "I'll keep it safe," he promised. For the first time, her lips curved into something like a smile. Not full, not bright, but a shadow of one. And to Elias, it was more beautiful than any sunrise. Over the next few days, Elias began speaking. More. He told her simple stories about Earth, about skies blue as oceans, about children who ran barefoot in fields of green. He spoke of his daughter, long lost, whose laughter still echoed in his memory. The girl listened. She never interrupted, never made a sound, but her glowing eyes stayed on him, soaking in every word. And though she gave no reply, Elias felt less alone than he had in months. One evening, as they shared the thin portion of food, Elias reached out carefully. He touched the back of her hand, light as a feather, then pulled away. "You're safe with me," he whispered. "I don't care what he says. You're not useless." The girl blinked quickly. For a moment, the glow in her skin shimmered brighter, as though his words had lit something inside her. She raised her hand slowly and touched her chest, right above her heart. Then she pointed at him. Elias's breath caught. "Me?" he asked. She nodded, then touched her chest again. It was the first time she had spoken without words. A language, born from silence, but clear as day. "You and me." Elias said softly. Her eyes filled with tears, but no sound escaped her lips. And yet, Elias understood perfectly, in that cold dungeon. Under the shadow of the Baron's cruelty, a bond was forming, something fragile, yet unbreakable. Not of chains, not of ownership, but of choice. The Baron had thrown her away as a joke, expecting only misery. But instead, in the dark silence of stone walls, the girl had found someone who listened, and Elias, broken soldier, had found something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The dungeon had become their world. Days blurred into nights, and nights stretched into endless silence. But within that silence, something was changing. The girl no longer sat in the corner, wrapped in her fear. Now, she often sat closer to Elias, sometimes beside him, sometimes across from him, always watching, always listening. She still made no sound, but her gestures grew clearer. Elias had learned her signs, the way she tilted her head when she wanted to ask a question, the way her eyes dimmed when she was afraid, the faint shimmer in her skin when she felt safe. It was not speech, but it was communication, and Elias, patient and gentle, treated each gesture as though it was the most important word in the galaxy. One night, after a long silence, Elias began to tell her another story. He spoke about rain on Earth, how it fell soft and steady on rooftops, how children splashed in puddles, how the smell of wet earth filled the air. His voice was tired but warm, and his eyes softened with memory as he spoke. The girl shifted closer, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She did not move away when his shoulder brushed hers. She only listened, her small hands resting quietly in her lap. When he finished, a deep stillness filled the cell. Elias closed his eyes, leaning back against the wall. Then he felt it, a touch, small, fingers pressed lightly against his forehead. His eyes opened in surprise. The girl was leaning close, her face serious, her glowing eyes locked on his. She kept her hand steady against his skin, and suddenly, he heard her, not with his ears, but inside his mind. A whisper, soft and trembling, like a candle flame in the dark. "Thank you." Elias froze. His breath caught in his chest. He stared at her, stunned. Her lips had not moved. The dungeon was silent, yet the voice was clear, fragile, and impossibly real. His voice shook. "You can speak." Her hand fell back to her lap. She lowered her eyes, ashamed, as if afraid he might call her cursed, like her father did. Elias leaned forward, his heart racing. No, don't hide. That was you, wasn't it? I heard you." Her fingers curled tightly against her knees. Then, slowly, she nodded. Elias felt his throat tighten. All this time she had not been mute. She had been unheard. Her voice was not broken, only different, and no one, not even her father, had cared enough to listen. He reached out, his chained hands trembling, and touched her shoulder gently. "Your voice. It's beautiful." Her eyes lifted to his, glowing with shock and something deeper — hope. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the silence around them heavy with meaning. Then, hesitantly, she reached out again, her small hand pressed against his chest, over his heart. And again, he heard her inside him, a whisper, softer this time, but clearer, "Safe." Elias's vision blurred. His chest ached with emotions he had buried for too long. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it gently against his heart. "Yes," he whispered aloud. "Safe, I promise." The girl's eyes filled with tears that glowed like liquid light. Her lips trembled, but still no sound came from them. Yet her voice echoed inside his mind again. Father never listened. Elias's jaw tightened. Rage burned quietly in him, not for himself, but for her, for every cruel word, every moment of neglect she had endured. He wanted to strike down the Baron, to make him see the truth of what he had thrown away. But for now, he only held her trembling hand and whispered, "I'm not him. I'll listen." For the first time, the silence between them was broken not by sound, but by connection. That night, Elias lay awake, staring at the faintly glowing stones she had given him. His mind replayed her voice over and over, that fragile whisper of "thank you," that desperate word, "safe." He understood now why she had given him the glowing stones. They weren't just gifts. They were pieces of her voice, pieces of herself, offered to the one person who finally saw her. In the cold dungeon of a cruel palace, the Baron's daughter had spoken at last, not with sound, but with truth. And Elias, broken soldier, had listened. The dungeon door burst open with a screech of iron. Torches flared, and the guards stormed in with heavy boots. Elias and the girl both sat up quickly, their quiet world of shadows torn apart by noise. The Baron himself stepped inside, his black robes dragged across the floor, and his sharp eyes burned with cruel delight. He did not come often to the dungeons, which meant his presence carried only one reason: malice. He looked at Elias first. "Human," he said, his voice like a blade. "I gave you my broken daughter, and yet I hear whispers that you treat her as if she is whole. Am I wrong?" Elias rose to his feet, chains clinking at his wrists. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "She is not broken." Gasps rose from the guards. The Baron's face darkened, and for a moment silence hung like a storm before thunder. Then the Baron laughed, a terrible, mocking sound. "Strange creature, this human," he said to his soldiers. "He thinks kindness makes her strong." He turned sharply, his gaze falling on the trembling girl. "Let us test this illusion." The Baron's clawed finger pointed directly at her. "Tomorrow, she enters the pit. She will fight the beasts. If she survives, perhaps she has some worth. If she dies," his smile stretched wide, "then silence is all she was ever meant for." The girl's body shook, her glowing eyes dimmed, and she pressed herself against the wall. Fear pouring from her small frame, Elias's chest tightened with fury. "She's just a child," he roared, stepping forward until the guards shoved spears at his chest. "She cannot fight your monsters." The Baron leaned close, his breath cold as winter. "Then she will die, and you will watch." With that, he turned and swept from the dungeon, his laughter echoing through the stone halls long after he was gone. The door slammed shut, and silence fell again, but it was no longer gentle. It was sharp, heavy, full of fear. The girl crouched in the corner, her hands clutching her knees. Her breath came fast and shallow, and though no sound escaped her lips, Elias could hear her voice trembling inside his mind. I can't. I will die." Elias dropped to his knees before her, his chains clattering. He took her hands firmly in his own, forcing her to look at him. Her glowing eyes were wide, wet with tears. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You are stronger than he knows. Stronger than he will ever understand." Her head shook quickly. "No, I am weak. I am nothing." Elias's heart broke at those words. He shook his head firmly. "No, you are not nothing. You hear me. You are light in the dark. You are more powerful than you think." Her small fingers tightened around his, desperate, searching. "I am afraid." Elias's throat burned. "So am I," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But we will face it together, you and me, not alone." For a long moment, they held each other's gaze. Slowly, her breathing steadied. The faint glow returned to her skin, soft but alive. That night, Elias did not sleep. He sat awake, whispering encouragement, telling her stories of human courage, of soldiers who stood against impossible odds, of mothers who shielded their children with bare hands, of people who found strength not in weapons but in love. The girl listened, her glowing eyes fixed on him, drinking in every word like they were lifelines. And though she still trembled, her silence was no longer despair. It was listening. It was believing. At last, she reached for his hand and pressed it to her chest, right over her heart. Her voice came faint but clear inside his mind. Together, Elias felt tears sting his eyes. He squeezed her hand gently. Yes, together. The dungeon remained dark, the air still heavy, but inside that cell, something had changed. The Baron thought fear would break her, that the pit would prove her useless. But instead, in that moment, she had found something the Baron had never given her: a reason to stand, a reason to fight. And Elias Ward swore silently to himself, if the pit was to be her trial, then he would make sure the galaxy remembered her not as the Baron's broken daughter, but as the girl who rose from silence. The next day came like a hammer blow. The guards dragged Elias and the girl from the dungeon, their chains clattering against the floor. The air was different now, not damp and still, but full of noise, shouts, growls, the echo of hundreds of voices. They were taken to the Baron's grand arena, open pit of stone surrounded by high walls and jeering nobles. The stands were filled with aliens of every kind, their eyes hungry for blood. Drums thundered, rattling the ground beneath their feet. The girl clung to Ilias's arm as they were shoved forward. Her glowing eyes darted everywhere, wide with terror. The Baron stood high above, watching from his throne of iron. His voice boomed across the arena. "Behold, my cursed daughter. Today, she will prove her worth or die, proving she has none." The crowd roared with cruel laughter. Ilias's chest burned with fury, but he bent low, pressing his forehead against hers. "Remember what I said?" he whispered. "You are not nothing. You are not weak. You are more than he will ever understand." Her lips trembled, but her glowing eyes met his. Together, her voice whispered inside his mind. The guards pulled Ilias back to the cage at the side of the pit, locking him behind bars. He gripped the metal desperately, his eyes never leaving her small figure in the center of the arena. The drums stopped. Silence fell. Then the gates opened. A monstrous beast lumbered out, a creature of claws and scales, towering twice the height of a man. Its jaws dripped with saliva, its roar shaking the stone walls. The crowd screamed in delight. The girl froze, her knees trembling. She looked so small, so fragile, standing before the monster. Her hands shook, and tears glimmered in her eyes. Ilias's voice broke across the silence. "Look at me," he shouted from the bars. "Don't look at them, look at me." Her head snapped toward him, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "You are not alone," he roared. "You are more than his curse. You are light. Show them." The beast charged, claws tearing into the sand. The girl's body shook, but she did not run. Instead, she closed her eyes, pressed a trembling hand to her chest, and let the fear wash over her. And then she opened. Her skin began to glow brighter, her eyes blazing like twin stars. The silence around her shattered, not with sound, but with power. A wave of light burst from her, rippling through the arena like fire through dry grass. The beast halted mid-charge, its roar choking in its throat. It staggered, eyes wide, as if struck by invisible chains. The crowd fell silent. Elias gripped the bars, breathless. She was radiant, her whole body glowing like a lantern in the night. The child, the Baron, had called useless now, stood blazing. With strength, the beast lunged again, but this time the girl raised her small hands. Light poured from her palms, striking the creature in the chest. It reeled back, crashing into the stone wall with a deafening crack. Dust rained down, and the crowd gasped in disbelief. The girl's voice whispered inside Ilias's mind, but now it was not trembling. It was strong. "Safe. I will make us safe." Ilias's throat tightened with pride. "Yes," he shouted. "Show them who you are." The beast roared again, struggling to its feet. But the girl no longer looked afraid. She stood tall, her glowing eyes burning with something new: courage. She raised both hands, and the light flared brighter, filling every corner of the arena. The creature stopped. Its fury melted into submission. With a final cry, it collapsed, bowing its massive head to the ground. The arena was silent. The nobles who had laughed now stared in awe. Even the guards shifted uneasily, their hands trembling on their weapons. High above, the Baron's face twisted in shock and rage. Ilias's heart pounded with pride and relief. Tears stung his eyes as he whispered to himself, "You did it. You showed them." The girl turned toward him, her body still glowing. Her lips never moved, but her voice filled his mind, warm and steady. "I am not nothing." Elias pressed his forehead against the bars, smiling through his tears. "No," he whispered. "You are everything." The arena remained frozen, stunned by what they had seen. A mute girl, once discarded as useless, had silenced beasts and nobles alike with a power no one could deny, and in that moment, she was no longer the Baron's shame, she was his greatest shock. The arena was frozen in silence. For the first time in living memory, the nobles of Zelthar had nothing to laugh at. The beast lay crushed against the stone wall. Its massive body bowed like a servant before the glowing girl. She stood in the middle of the pit, small but radiant, her skin shimmering like living light. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, yet her eyes blazed with steady fire. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. "The Baron's daughter. She is not broken. She is power." Elias gripped the cage bars so tightly that his knuckles bled. His heart pounded with fierce pride. She had stood, she had fought, she had won, against fear, against her father's cruelty, against everything. But high above, the Baron rose from his iron throne, his face twisted with fury. His claws dug into the armrests as he shouted, his voice thundering across the pit. "Impossible," he roared. "She was nothing. She was cursed." The girl lifted her glowing eyes toward him. For the first time, she did not lower her head. She did not tremble. She stood tall, her silence sharper than any scream. Elias called out, his voice echoing across the arena. "No, Baron. She was never nothing. You simply never saw her." The nobles gasped at the human's defiance. The guards shifted uneasily, torn between their loyalty to the Baron and the truth their eyes could no longer deny. The Baron's teeth bared in a snarl. "Silence him," he roared. Guards rushed to Elias's cage, but before they could reach, the girl raised her hand. A wave of light burst outward, knocking the soldiers back like leaves in a storm. Gasps filled the stands. She had not just defeated a beast, she had defied her father's entire court. The Baron staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you?" he hissed. The girl's lips never moved, but her voice rang clear inside every mind in the arena. Not trembling now, not weak, strong, fierce, unbreakable. "I am not your shame." The crowd erupted in whispers. Nobles clutched at each other, stunned. Some bowed their heads in fear, others in awe. The Baron's power, the cruelty. He ruled with head cracked in that single moment. Elias pressed his forehead against the bars, tears stinging his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "Show them who you are." The girl's glow dimmed slightly as she turned toward him. She walked slowly, each step sure, her small feet leaving faint prints of light on the sand. When she reached his cage, she placed her hand on the iron bars. Elias reached through, gripping her hand tightly. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "Not just for me, for all of them." Her voice echoed in his mind, warm and steady. "You listened. No one else ever did." His throat tightened. "And I always will." Above them, the Baron bellowed in rage, but his voice no longer carried the same power. The crowd was not laughing anymore. They were watching his daughter, not him. Their eyes no longer shone with fear of the Baron, but with wonder at the girl he had thrown away. The Baron had tried to use her as a weapon of humiliation. Instead, she had become his undoing. The guards hesitated now, glancing between the furious Baron and the radiant child. Whispers grew louder. The people had seen the truth. No matter how hard the Baron screamed, he could not erase what they had witnessed with their own eyes. Elias leaned close to her, whispering through the bars. "They will remember this. They will remember you. The girl's glowing eyes softened, and for the first time, a true smile touched her lips. Not a shadow, not a flicker, but a smile full of strength and life. She pressed her small hand over his heart again, and her voice filled his mind one last time. Together. Elias closed his eyes, tears slipping down his face. Together, he whispered back, and so it was. The Baron's cruel gift had been meant as a curse, but it had become a bond that defied empires, a bond that turned silence into strength, weakness into power, despair into hope. Across the galaxy, the story would spread, the human who listened, and the mute girl who spoke without sound. A story that shook the throne of a tyrant and lit a spark in the hearts of many. For in the end, the Baron had been wrong. Humans do not just survive. They see, and because one human saw her, the galaxy would never be the same again.